She Carries the Cosmos by Kyle J. Durrant. First published in the Parasite Gods anthology, published by Blood Rites Horror. Stars sparkled in a cloudless sky, the half-moon distant and pale, as a dread wind swept across the grassy moors. Down from the old Celtic hill it blew, carrying in its wake the whispers of long-forsaken spirits. Blasphemy was to be done this night. Where once the old gods of man received praise and reverence, tonight would an eldritch entity from beyond hidden veils be sought out for communion. A circle of stone stood upon the old Celtic hill, ancient monoliths striking skyward, silhouetted against the pale light of midnight. The ground still remembered the footfalls of dancing pagans, who with fire in their hands and briar in their hair would perform for the pleasure of Maponus. There were no dancing feet upon the hill tonight, and the sacred signs of the Celts, which had marked those stones for centuries innumerable, had been obscured by writhing, alien, occultic icons unfit for mankind's eyes. The exiled gods of the earth shuddered in revulsion to see such sacrilege, but were powerless to intervene as the goat's blood seeped into their monuments. Within the circle stood the architects of this blasphemy, wrapped in robes of black with hoods peaked and sinister. One amongst their number lay upon the stone slab at the circle's centre, wherein the old, half-forgotten days' offerings were made to the bounty of nature. Now she was the offering, stripped of her modesty, naked skin glistening, the creases of her discarded robe like waves upon the stone. One amongst the gathering stepped towards her and raised a hand to the inky heavens, revealing fingers stained with the still warm, still dripping blood of the goat. The disciples around them, 6 in all, raised both arms towards the stars, silent and expectant. "Hear us, O formless Father," bloody-handed Jacob implored, each word enunciated with an almost alien precision. "Your faithful are gathered beneath the stars to give unto you that which is your one desire. Behold, O cosmic intelligence, your willing vessel, who has pledged her mind and body to your will." The bloodied hand lowered, landing upon the woman's forehead, where it painted a simple yet wholly unholy icon. "Nahai, Nahai, praise to Yukul," the disciples chanted. "We assemble here where the veil is thin and call upon the voice of eternity," Jacob continued, raising both his arms. "Your vessel awaits, O shapeless one, to carry within her the first of your offspring given form. Nahai, Nahai, praise to Yukul." The sky rippled like a storm-tossed lake, waves of shimmering light extinguishing stars and leaving new ones in their wake. Ghostly, fragile ribbons of chromatic dust drifted on unseen currents, snaking towards the rupture between realities. The sacrilegious assembly of souls gazed up towards the sundered heavens, through the veil, minds enraptured by a sight they were never meant to see. "Nahai, Nahai, Getukrifin Rukhusht Yukul Tir," the disciples chanted, eyes widening in wondrous rapture. The woman upon the altar panted and moaned, fingers curling, clasping the robe. Her skin was tingling, hairs standing on end from unending goosebumps, as she stared unerringly into that cosmic splendor. Though it was formless and impossible to see, the presence of their invisible deity could be felt. It buzzed in their minds, through their bodies, and set their nerves afire. Through the fissure in reality came terrible tendrils of glittering light, descending like translucent tentacles towards the hilltop stones. A surreal glow illuminated the slopes as the cosmic coils touched the bloodied rocks, casting shadows like those of towering giants onto the wild moors. Then those dreadful ethereal energies converged above the stone slab, forming an orb of chromatic splendor that dazzled the disciples of Yukul. Overcome by euphoria as the radiance lingered, reflected in the irises of the nebulous eyes, the woman shuddered, gasping, moaning, every muscle in her body tensed by bliss. While her skin had glistened before, now she shone like a spirit, as though light emerged not from the coalescence of energies above her, but from somewhere deep within. Then, with a movement so sudden it startled the worshippers, their sustained chanting momentarily faltering, the orb dropped, disappearing into the chosen vessel's body and bathing the hilltop in shadow. The branches of alien light parted, retreating like startled snakes, slithering back towards the rift from whence they came. As familiar stars shimmered back into sight, the dimensional convergence ended, and all was still upon the stone-topped hill. Praise be to Yukul, O formless father, the cosmic intelligence, and praise be to Melissa, mother to the Prince of Eternity, Jacob proclaimed, his previously precise intonations shaken by an awestruck gasp. Praise be, the disciples echoed, similarly stunned. Nahai, Nahai! Panting, skin tingling and permeated with warmth, Melissa sat up from the stone slab with her hands upon her belly. There was a subtle but unmistakable swelling there that had not been present before, and she turned to face their leader with an astonished, overjoyed smile. It's there, Jacob! Just as you promised, she said, tears forming in her eyes. The offspring of Yukul. I'm carrying its child. The assembly cheered and converged upon the stone slab. Jacob helped Melissa back into her robe and planted a kiss on her blood-smeared forehead. Praise be, he repeated, and led his colt from the tainted hilltop circle across the silenced moor and back to their sacred sanctuary. Thick cloth cushions, warm fluffy blankets, and a silky smooth nightgown were presented to Melissa as she stepped, somewhat tentatively, into the room where she was to see through her profane pregnancy. A four-poster bed, restored by one of the cult, dominated the room, draped with black, blue-embellished curtains. Iconography, like that which had stained the once sacred stones, decorated the walls, coiling in sinister swirls from floor to ceiling. There was a window across the room, but another thick curtain, identical to the ones around the bed, had been drawn across it. As such, the room was bathed in shadow, illuminated only by the slightest slivers of light that crept around the curtain's edge, and the assorted candles flickering in Victorian lamps. Your comfort is all that matters, Jacob had explained. You need not worry about the buzzing of electronics in this room, and we shall provide you with all the food and water you may need. Though somewhat disappointed to be denied even a radio or television with which to pass the time, the length of this blasphemous gestation was a mystery, Melissa's heart yet swelled with pride and joy. She was carrying the child of a god after all, and what greater honour was there? Instinctively her hands rested on the swelling of her belly. Jacob took her hand and led her to the bed, where the cult's two other female members, Hannah and Tina, helped her under the covers and prepped her pillows. As Melissa got herself comfortable, sinking into the cloud-like mattress, Jacob circled the bed to stand at her feet. In his hands he held a hand-bound leather book, within which were contained the secrets of their unconventional religion. Melissa had read it once, upon first joining the cult, and had gazed upon strange sigils and illustrations that at first had filled her heart with dread. But then Jacob, the founder and first amongst the cult to commune with formless Yukul, and the only of their number who could decipher the cryptic language upon the pages, had explained Yukul's intentions, its sympathy for mankind who, like it, sought things they could not have, and how Yukul had promised to grant those who aided it abilities beyond evolutionary attainment. It was of these promises Jacob now spoke, the book lying open in the crook of his arm. Humanity has long floundered in its waning years at the pinnacle of accomplishment, held back from its rightful place in the cosmos by internal divisions and beastly flaws. Our minds are yet to open. We chase dreams of greed, hatred and lust, and shut ourselves away from the celestial knowledge that lingers just out of reach. Those that strive for advancement, for ascension, find themselves too weak to embrace that which awaits beyond the bounds of conventional thought. Yukul strives, too. Beyond the veils of accepted reality, it drifts amidst the infinite currents of a populous dimension, without body or shape, but with a mind greater than any imprisoned in material form. It drifts and observes and watches as the life of a million worlds reproduces and flourishes. It sees their legacies, as sons and daughters hear stories of their forefathers, and Yukul longs for a legacy of its own. It has drifted for millennia, but knows that nothing, not even its celestial mind, is truly eternal. What will Yukul leave behind when its unimpeded intellect expires? But in its dimension of flourishing, flawless life, there are no beings with bodies that can receive and rear the child of Yukul. So it sent its thought beyond the veils, seeking beings with the necessary potential to make its dream a reality. Beings with minds that seek admittance to the cosmic collective, but whose animalistic desires persistently pull them back. Beings like humanity. Beings whose bodies can bear the offspring of the formless, but whose minds are receptive to its words. Many heard the whispers of Yukul, but none could fathom its greatness. None until we, the disciples of Yukul, who have answered its call and fulfilled its eon-long wish. Jacob closed the book and locked eyes with Melissa. She gazed back at him, though his scrutinizing stare and the attention of the cult as a whole made her skin crawl. This is why I joined, she reminded herself, taking a steadying breath. I am Yukul's chosen vessel and loyal servant. Hail the formless father. Our sister Melissa carries now in her womb the child of our master. By its birth will we be granted freedom from the vices of man, and our minds expanded to comprehend the psychic truth. Praise be to Yukul, for it will grant us ascension. Nahai, Nahai, praise to Yukul, the cult chorused. Hannah, you will serve as handmaiden to Melissa. All that she desires you will provide. Together you shall ensure the safety of the Prince of Eternity, Jacob commanded. Hannah bowed her head to him and grasped hold of Melissa's hand. Returning the gesture, all Melissa could do was smile, her face almost alight with purpose. Was this, she wondered, how Mary felt when she carried Jesus? No, she couldn't have. She didn't see the power of her God. The heavens were not sundered before her eyes. For those sweet, rapturous moments Melissa had been afforded a glimpse at the forbidden, at a distant dimension previously unwitnessed by human eyes. Her face flushed as she recalled the euphoria when those energies converged above her, and the fearful yet invigorating rush as the vibrant sphere had descended into her womb. That was divinity incarnate, she realized, and so was the entity now growing within. Though the cult operated from a recently refurbished and converted barn at the edge of the village, its members lived reasonably normal lives. Their occultic interests were a closely guarded secret, and never a topic of conversation in the workplace. So when its members, minus Melissa and Hannah, returned to their regular lives in the aftermath of the ritual, it was business as normal in Larston. Jacob returned to his role as a librarian in the village's little library, where he had first encountered the fateful writings on shapeless Yukul amidst half-buried, forgotten documents. They were reputedly copied from a mystical, marred book of indeterminate age and origin, which had subsequently vanished without a trace. Though Melissa and the messianic child within her were never far from his mind, there was nothing in the manner of the man that betrayed his part in an eerie, sacrilegious ritual that had painted the skies near the village with shimmering lights. Those lights had waked children screaming from their slumber, and set all the dogs in the area howling and barking as though the devil walked amongst them. At church, Jacob was told, the vicar had ranted about ancient evils upon the moors. Pagan demons were, supposedly, roaming the hills as he spoke. Jacob laughed the whole thing off. Just some kind of atmospheric anomaly, probably, he told old Mrs. Carter when she came to renew her books. I slept through the whole thing. If it was the end of the world, I promise you, it would have woken me. As for Melissa and Hannah's disappearance from the village, each had made careful arrangements to explain their absences. Melissa, supposedly, had to travel to France to be with an unwell, potentially passing grandfather. It was not too far from the truth. Her grandfather was, indeed, in France, and had been for a couple of decades housed comfortably in the Neuilly-sur-Seine cemetery. Hannah, meanwhile, was simply on holiday for a couple of months. After that time had passed, Tina would take over as Melissa's handmaiden, while she took a holiday of her own. All this had been arranged weeks before the ritual, under Jacob's precise guidance as he relayed the words of Yukul. It was only through Yukul that they had identified the ideal time to perform their communion, and in so doing ensure Melissa's impregnation. Over the following few weeks, the cult gathered in Melissa's chamber, where Jacob would sermonize and praise the will of Yukul, sharing with the disciples the possibilities that would open to them once Yukul aided their ascension. No longer would they be plagued by jealousy or succumb to misery, for such powerful entities as they would become exist beyond such base emotions. They would never want for knowledge again, and never fear the lies told by other men, for dishonesty would be unveiled, and the secrets of the cosmos fed directly to their liberated, infinite minds. And it would all be thanks to Yukul. When they were done with their chanting and praising, Jacob would sit with Melissa for a time, providing her with books from the library or asking questions about the wellness of mother and child. Every few days, it seemed, her bump was growing bigger, expanding at a far greater rate than any human pregnancy, but never, it seemed, to a discomforting extent. "I wish I dared to walk around," Melissa said one day, "but I worry that to do so may harm the father's child. Hannah has been so good to me, though, massaging my legs to chase away the pains." And when the cult dispersed, leaving Melissa and Hannah alone again, they would read together and chat and coo to the holy offspring. "I pray I will be afforded this opportunity next," Hannah mused towards the end of the 3rd week. Resting her head with tenderness upon the bump, she smiled up at Melissa. "How does it feel to carry within you the child of a being from beyond? I bet you feel like a goddess. I'd like to feel that, before we ascend and our minds evolve beyond such simple pleasures. Just once, before the Shapeless One grants us all that our humanity denies." "It's everything you say and more," Melissa replied, her voice laced with dreaminess. "It's like my body is full of electricity, rippling just beneath my skin, connecting me to the formless Father's dimension. I doubt a normal pregnancy fills the body with energy like this. And sometimes, when I'm drifting into sleep, I think I hear the voice of Yukul. It's a deep rumble like thunder, but with a peculiar softness. Kind of like a cat purring, I suppose, but so much louder and so much more comforting." "It sounds amazing," Hannah sighed. "You're so lucky." Melissa rested her head back against a wall of pillows. "Yes, I am." Within her womb, the alien offspring moved. 2 more months went by in a blur, and Hannah remained at Melissa's side, refusing to trade places with Tina. She had a duty, she said, a duty given to her by Yukul itself. Though she appeared exhausted, with dark rings around her eyes, her hair dishevelled, the cult dared not oppose the will of their god. By now the child had grown, so that Melissa appeared 4 months pregnant, and it was beginning to move at regular intervals, like a coiling snake settling in a rocky crevice. The cult's chants continued, day after day, as Melissa became more and more a part of the bed, propped up on the regularly washed pillows that seemed almost to absorb her. When first she had climbed into that bed, she had been a somewhat curvy woman of modest beauty and strength, but as her preternatural pregnancy continued, it sapped away at her body. Her face had thinned so that once subtle cheekbones now stood out like carved stone. Her arms were skeletal sticks, barely strong enough to be raised from the bed, resting almost always upon her swollen stomach. Aside from her face and arms, this was the only part of her Jacob now allowed to be revealed above the covers, though he insisted this was for her own comfort. Blue veins stood out in stark contrast with her pale, light-forsaken skin, and whenever the cult gave praise to Yukul, the flesh there would shift, as though the child were responding to their prayers. "It'll all be worth it in the end," Hannah whispered beside Melissa day after day. "Once Yukul's child is born, you won't need this body anymore. Your mind will be free to embrace the cosmos, shapeless and unlimited." Melissa, though, no longer listened to Hannah. She no longer spoke, either, lacking the strength for it as her body fed the blasphemy inside. Yet, as Hannah's sentiments suggested, her mind was stronger than ever, reaching beyond human thought and into the vast reaches of space. There she had finally encountered the mind of Yukul again, and it had spoken with her, and invited her consciousness to remain with it outside of her material prison. With eldritch utterances, speaking in sounds as unalike from human words as the sky is from an amoeba, it thanked her for offering her body to be the vessel of its legacy. Not knowing how she understood its ethereal alien language, Melissa simply praised the formless entity. "Nahai, Nahai," she said. "Nahai getuk rifin rukush Yukul tir." At the edge of her awareness, however, Melissa could still feel her emaciated, withering body. Whenever Hannah squeezed her sickly hands, the signals were still present in her mind, and constantly, without respite, the bastard being writhed inside her, a material manifestation of a mind without form, without shape. She could not see it, could not see anything in that room, but she could feel everything, and knew already that it would not resemble anything meant to walk on earth. This was, though, the will of Yukul. Had it not promised that she would be accepted into the infinite expanse of cosmic splendor? Would she not drift among the stars, freed from the shackles of human imperfection? It will all be worth it in the end. More months passed. Jacob stood at the head of the four-poster bed, beholding the corpse-like shell of the woman he had recruited, grey breasts laden with milk, and gravid abdomen stretched to its limits. Her skin was so thin that it appeared almost like vellum, pulled so tight about her womb now that the movements of the sacrilegious child were always visible, no matter how dull the light. "I'll be next," Hannah muttered, rocking in her chair beside the bed. "I'll be next." "It is time," the leader announced, standing with his hand-bound book in hand. "We must call forth the child. Yukul has spoken, the offspring is ready, but birth is a concept unknown to beings without bodies. Together we will summon it from Melissa's womb, and the legacy of our formless father shall be set loose." Empty, lightless eyes stared across the bed, straight at Jacob's face. It was almost enough to make him reconsider, but cosmic greatness awaited. Yukul's will be done. Swallowing his misgivings, Jacob opened the book to the final, most recently added page, scribbled during half-conscious communion with the voice of eternity less than a day ago. The other disciples of Yukul raised their hands, each grasping an individual candle, and began to chant. "Nahai, Nahai, Yukul Iksin Iksin. Nahai, Nahai, Yukul Iksin Iksin. Nahai, Nahai." We call upon the child of Yukul, the formless father, the cosmic intelligence, to slip free of its sacred vessel and step foot upon the material world. "Nukni, Roluk, Zitan Zitaner," Jacob cried. "Be born from your chosen and step forth to greet the world. Your faithful await. Nukni, Roluk, Nahai Iksin Zitan." Melissa's body shifted, her belly rippling, as the silhouette within shifted, its form uncertain. A shape, somewhere between a hand and a head, pressed against the translucent flesh, then slipped out of sight. Though barely lucid, Hannah rose from her seat and threw aside the bedsheets. Melissa's legs were little but bone, covered in the same grey, waxy skin that clung cadaverously to her atrophied muscles. Her legs were parted, and the rippling skin of her belly sagged as the entity within sought escape, birthing itself without the aid of its mother's strength. The first part of it to come into sight was a fur-covered, bloodied arm that ended in two claws, a human thumb, and a dangling stalk-like eye. It grasped at the bedsheets, staining them with sulphurous ichor and congealing blood. One of the hand candles went out, but its holder continued their chant. "Free yourself, young child of the cosmos," Jacob screamed, though his stomach was lurching at sight of the blasphemous birth. "Iksin Yukul Nikni." Another appendage emerged from Melissa's body, writhing like a snake, similarly coated in thick, dark fur. This awful limb ended in a mouth and 3 human fingers that closed around it. Opening wide, gulping in air, it revealed a mixture of teeth that could belong to every earthly creature or none of them, all of varying sizes and sharpness. When a third spindly member broke free of its vessel, it too possessed a mouth, though this one was akin to the sucker of a squid, lined with bone-like barbs. From this mouth broke a scream that evoked at once the birth cries of a human child, the deathly screech of a diving falcon, the yelping of an injured hound, and the sickening bastardization of the song of the kookaburra. With its awful malformed head, the child dragged itself further free, revealing no less than 6 more twisted, writhing, slithering appendages, none of which could be characterized as arms, legs, nor any other semblance of sane terrestrial life. Some ended in eyes and toes, others in yet more mouths with talons, claws, fingers, tentacles, or even tail-like tendrils. Much of it was furry, yet upon certain sections of flesh were seen scales, or slime-coated skin the likes of which would be seen upon a mollusk. The eyes were of 100 different kinds, merged together into unholy hybridizations. In one place, the compound eyes of an insect transformed at the centre into the startling irises of a feline, whereas elsewhere the dark eyes of a shark stared out from snail-like stalks, amongst countless multitudes of other blood-curdling combinations. Soon the entire entity had emerged, a mass of flailing, limb-like structures around a thick, trunk-like body formed of spines, flippers, and feelers. Fur and feathers alike insulated its sacrilegious shape, and yet more eyes and mutated, mewling mouths emerged from within folds of surging flesh. With the completion of its grotesque birth, which had soaked the sheets in ichor, blood, and stinking slime, the chants of the cult petered out into silence. All gazed upon the mass of monstrous confusion with wide eyes and open mouths. Tina wavered, turned to Jacob as if about to scream, then slumped to the floor. Another of their number sat down upon the ground, laughed, and then burnt his tongue upon the flickering candle. Meanwhile, beyond the confines of flesh, Melissa had experienced every tear, every squirming push, and every squelching sundering of flesh. Even at the farthest edge of the cosmos, where her mind floated along chromatic currents beside the formless father, her consciousness was overcome by the pain of the awful abomination's blasphemous birth. Coherent thought was chased away with each body-breaking rip as her body was pulled apart, and throughout the ordeal her mind had been able to form only one sound, a soul-shattering, mindless, deafening scream. So horrendous was the psychic disturbance that Yukul, for all its power, could scarce endure it, and with all the cosmic, celestial energy it could muster, it banished Melissa's unbound consciousness from the liberty of cosmic ascendance, reconnecting her mind to her material form. Instantly, the tether between mind and body pulled taut. Serene space was replaced by the blur of passing stars. A million lines of fluorescent light stretched into infinity by the startling velocity of her passage. Where before she had been free to drift wherever her mind wished, and bask in the beauty of the unseen expanses of unknown celestial spheres, now she was overwhelmed by the desperate pull of her pained body. Liberty had been so close at hand, her cosmic destiny almost fulfilled, and now divinity had been denied, all because of a single soul-shattering scream. By the time she saw the distorted image of Earth, she was already passing through the roof of the converted barn and back into her emaciated, powerless, and ruined body. Everything was dark, and her first fear was that her eyes had succumbed to the ravages of decay. She was not to be granted such a mercy, however, and as her recently returned mind reacclimated itself with the confines of its mortal carcass, the darkness veiling her vision parted. For the first time since freeing herself of this hateful shell, Melissa saw with her own eyes what had become of her, and what she had birthed. Robbed of that which Yukul had promised, confined to a cadaverous prison, and faced with the awful amalgamation of flesh she had borne, she sought only to scream aloud, yet her vocal cords had wasted away. Summoning all the strength she could muster, her arms shaking, tendons tearing, and bones bending, Melissa plunged overgrown, jagged nails into her eyes and reduced them to bloody jelly. Blinded, she let her fragile, exhausted arms fall. The cult looked on, ignorant to the dreadful experience she had endured and the taste of cosmic freedom she was now denied. Jacob, unperturbed but perhaps unhinged by all that he had witnessed, proud of his piousness to Yukul, knelt down before the bed and took the monstrosity into his arms. Hannah came to his aid, for it was a grotesquerie of gigantic proportion, and together they hefted it up the bed. Its prickling protrusions pierced their skin as they raised it beyond the ruination between Melissa's legs and placed it against her engorged breasts. Paralyzed, her mind screamed in protest. She didn't want that thing anywhere near her. Yukul be damned! But knew she was powerless to stop it as two fang-lined, inhuman mouths closed around her nipples and began to drain her not just of milk, but also of what little blood remained. "Praise to Yukul!" Jacob proclaimed, and Hannah cheered with him. The rest of the room was silent, and Jacob turned upon them with fire in his eyes. "Praise to Yukul! Say it, else I'll feed you to its progeny!" Their stammered voices repeated his praise. The cultist who had burned his tongue broke down into hysterical laughter again. "We'll do you next," Jacob whispered, leaning close to Hannah. "By the will of Yukul, Nahai." Nahai Nikni, Getukrifin, Rukusht Yukul Tir, Hannah finished. A broad, maniacal smile formed across her features as she clasped Melissa's unmoving, icy hands, whilst the beastly child of Yukul pulsated, feeding, awful eyes watching all assembled in that room. Deep in the monstrosity's mind, the formless father watched too, and produced a twisted, eldritch, inhuman sound. That sound, though unheard by the devoted and fearful, meant one simple thing: satisfaction. The Parasite Gods anthology is available for purchase through Amazon. A link is in the description below. Please pick up a copy to support the authors contained within and to help fight cancer.